It was a perfectly normal Friday night family dinner until my older brother, Derek, decided to use my parents' dining room table as his personal stage. He strutted into the room, wearing a ridiculously expensive designer shirt that I knew for a fact he couldn't afford, and casually tossed the sleek, heavy keys of a brand-new Lamborghini Huracan directly onto the table. Next to him stood Chloe, his stunning new girlfriend, who I already knew came from genuine, generational wealth. "Smells interesting," Derek sneered, looking down at the slow-roasted beef I had just spent 4 hours preparing. He picked up his fork, aggressively poked at the meat, and sighed dramatically for Chloe's benefit. "You know, babe, I keep telling my little sibling here that they need to stop making these cheap, tasteless meals. But what can you expect from a part-time freelance cook who still lives in a tiny, cheap apartment while the rest of us actually build wealth?" Chloe looked incredibly uncomfortable, offering me a polite, apologetic smile. My parents, sitting across the table, just nodded in agreement, completely enabling Derek's delusion as they always did. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even defend my cooking. I just quietly wiped my hands on a napkin and looked down at the Lamborghini keys resting next to my plate. What Derek, my parents, and poor Chloe didn't know was that I wasn't a struggling freelance cook. I was the CEO of an elite exotic car leasing group. And that shiny new Lamborghini currently sitting in my parents' driveway? I was the exact person secretly funding it, and Derek was exactly 90 days late on his payments. To understand exactly why I was standing in my parents' dining room, quietly taking insults from a man driving a car he couldn't afford, you have to understand the absolute joke that is our family dynamic. For as long as I can remember, Derek was the undisputed golden child. To my parents, he wasn't just their son, he was a visionary. Over the last decade, they had happily poured their entire life savings into his endless string of spectacular failures. There was the revolutionary tech app that never even launched, his disastrous crypto trading phase that wiped out their retirement fund, and the luxury lifestyle brand that sold exactly 0 t-shirts. Every single time Derek went bankrupt, my parents simply remortgaged their house to bail him out, claiming he just needed one more chance to make it big. Meanwhile, I was the invisible child. I figured out very early on that if I wanted to survive, I had to do it completely on my own. I moved out the second I turned 18 and built my life entirely in the shadows. I worked myself to the bone, grinding through sleepless nights, teaching myself finance and investing until I built a highly successful asset management firm from the ground up. But I knew my parents. I knew that the absolute second they smelled even a hint of wealth on me, they would relentlessly demand that I hand it over to fund Derek's next delusional project. If I had money, they would view me as nothing more than a human ATM for their golden boy. So, I created the ultimate cover story. For the past 5 years, I let them believe I was just a struggling, low-income freelance accountant who occasionally did some private catering to make ends meet. I drove a reliable, beat-up sedan. I wore plain, unbranded clothes around them. It was the perfect disguise. It kept them completely off my back, and more importantly, it kept my multi-million-dollar empire perfectly safe from my brother's greedy hands. But hiding my wealth didn't just protect my peace, it also gave me a front-row seat to Derek's fake life. Which is exactly how I ended up holding the master lease to the bright green Lamborghini sitting in the driveway, and why I was about to serve my arrogant brother a reality check he would never, ever forget. Exactly 6 months ago, I was sitting in my private corporate office when the general manager of my exotic car leasing firm called me. He told me there was a guy in our main showroom throwing an absolute tantrum because his lease application for a Lamborghini Huracan had just been instantly denied. The guy was loudly claiming to be a highly successful entrepreneur, but his credit score was completely trashed, and he had absolutely zero verifiable income. Out of curiosity, I pulled up the rejected file on my computer system. I almost laughed out loud when I saw the name on the application. It was Derek. He was desperately trying to lease the supercar under a completely fake shell company. I quickly put 2 and 2 together. He had just started dating Chloe, a girl from a very wealthy, prominent family, and he needed a heavy prop to sell his fake, self-made billionaire persona. Any normal business owner would have just thrown his fraudulent application straight into the shredder. But I didn't. I saw an absolute golden opportunity to finally give my arrogant brother exactly enough rope to hang himself. Acting as the anonymous CEO, I instructed my manager to override the system and approve the lease. However, because Derek's financials were a complete joke, the system required a massive $50,000 security deposit just to release the keys. Derek obviously didn't have that kind of money. So, I secretly paid the entire deposit myself through a dummy corporate account. I literally funded his fake luxury lifestyle out of my own pocket just to get his signature on that dotted line. Why would I do that? Because the specific contract I had my manager hand him, which Derek arrogantly signed without bothering to read a single page, contained an ironclad, zero-tolerance default clause. If he missed a payment, the car could be repossessed immediately, at any time, without any prior warning. Sitting at the dinner table now, watching him confidently swirl his cheap wine and publicly mock my cooking in front of his girlfriend, I felt a cold, highly satisfying smirk creeping up my face. Derek genuinely believed he was untouchable. He had absolutely no idea that his precious status symbol legally belonged to the struggling freelance cook sitting right across from him. And more importantly, he didn't know that he was currently exactly 90 days past due on his monthly payments. So, back at the present moment at the dinner table, Derek was in full performance mode. Having successfully insulted my cooking, he turned his entire attention back to Chloe, leaning back in his dining chair with the unearned, obnoxious confidence of a billionaire. Yeah, babe, the dealership actually begged me to finance it, Derek lied smoothly, casually spinning the Lamborghini keys on the table. But you know my business philosophy. If you can't buy it in straight cash, you can't afford it. I just wired them a cool $250,000 and drove it right off the lot. You should have seen the look on the salesman's face. I actually had to take a sip of my water to hide my smile. The sheer audacity to sit there and brag about paying cash for a car that was currently 90 days in default was genuinely mind-blowing. But Derek wasn't done playing the alpha male. Deciding that insulting my food wasn't enough, he needed to physically assert his dominance over me to impress his new girlfriend. He turned his head and actually snapped his fingers at me like I was a dog. Hey, he ordered, not even bothering to look me in the eye. Why don't you make yourself useful for once? Go down to the cellar and fetch that vintage bottle of red wine I brought over last time. And clear these plates while you're at it. Make sure you actually scrub them clean this time. Before I could even process the disrespect, my mother immediately chimed in to back him up, exactly like she always did. Yes, please hurry up, my mother urged, giving me a sharp, warning glare from across the table. And use the good crystal glasses from the top cabinet. Try not to drop them. We really don't want you embarrassing your brother in front of his lovely guest. Just know your place and be helpful. I looked at my mother's scolding face and then down at Derek's arrogant, punchable smirk. He was actively treating me like a low-level, hired servant in front of the entire family. He expected me to get angry, to throw a tantrum, or to storm off so he could play the victim and apologize to Chloe for his crazy, jealous sibling. Instead, I just felt a wave of absolute, icy calm wash over my entire body. The trap was perfectly set, and he had just gleefully walked right into it. I stood up slowly, keeping my posture perfectly straight, and calmly picked up his plate. Of course, Derek, I said smoothly, offering him a polite, empty smile. I'll go take care of that right now. As I calmly began stacking the empty dinner plates, Chloe immediately pushed her chair back and stood up. Please, let me help you carry those to the kitchen, she offered, her voice soft and genuinely apologetic. She reached out, trying to take the heavy stack of porcelain from my hands. Derek instantly scoffed, reaching over to grab her wrist and gently pull her back down into her seat. Babe, relax. Don't touch those dirty dishes, you'll ruin your manicure. That's what they're here for. It builds character. Chloe pulled her hand away from his grip, looking absolutely mortified. She shot a glance at my parents, expecting them to correct their son's atrocious manners, but my parents just smiled blankly, completely oblivious to the tension. Derek, that's incredibly rude, Chloe whispered fiercely, her cheeks flushing red with second-hand embarrassment. I took a brief moment to really look at Chloe. In my line of work, I deal with high-net-worth individuals every single day. I know exactly how to spot a superficial gold digger, the kind of person who will happily ignore massive red flags as long as the credit card doesn't bounce. But Chloe wasn't one of them. She was wearing wealth, sure, but it was quiet wealth. Her jewelry was understated, her manners were impeccable, and her eyes showed genuine empathy. She wasn't dating my brother because he threw Lamborghini keys on the table. She was dating him because he had successfully sold her a completely fabricated story of being a hardworking, self-made entrepreneur who respected the value of $1. She was a fundamentally decent person who was being completely conned by a sociopathic narcissist. My brother wasn't just committing financial fraud against my leasing company, he was emotionally scamming a good woman. I gave Chloe a reassuring, subtle nod. "It's perfectly fine, Chloe." "I really don't mind," I said quietly, making sure my tone was warm and respectful toward her. As I turned my back and walked out of the dining room toward the kitchen, my mindset completely shifted. Originally, my plan was simple: let Derek enjoy his little family dinner and then have the repo team quietly tow the car away at 3 a.m. while he was sleeping. I just wanted my company's property back. But after seeing how he was actively manipulating and humiliating a perfectly nice woman just to stroke his own massive, fragile ego? No, this wasn't going to happen quietly in the dark anymore. The fake reality my brother had built was officially ending tonight. I walked into the quiet, dimly lit kitchen and let the heavy swinging door close securely behind me. The second I was out of sight, the polite, submissive smile completely dropped from my face. I set the stack of dirty dishes down on the marble counter, pulled my smartphone out of my pocket, and bypassed the usual apps. Instead, I opened a highly secured, encrypted application that linked directly to my asset management firm's private database. My thumb moved quickly, swiping past millions of dollars in corporate accounts until I found exactly what I was looking for: the active lease file for a neon green Lamborghini Huracan. I tapped the screen, opening Derek's profile. The bold red text flashed across my screen like a glaring neon sign: account in default. 90 days past due. He hadn't made a single monthly payment since the day he drove the car off my lot. I scrolled down to the vehicle tracking section. Thanks to the mandatory GPS unit hidden inside the dashboard of every single luxury vehicle we lease, I could see the car's exact location pulsating softly as a blue dot on the digital map. It was parked right outside my parents' front door. Next, I opened my text messages and scrolled down to a specific contact saved simply as Repo, Unit 4. This was the private recovery team I had specifically hired for high-risk, high-value asset retrieval. They weren't your average tow truck drivers. They were aggressive, fast, and completely immune to threats or bribes. I had instructed them to park their tow truck 2 blocks away from my parents' house just as a precaution, waiting for my signal. My thumbs flew across the keyboard. The target is parked in the driveway. The client is inside eating dinner. No need to wait for the cover of night. Execute the repossession order immediately. Make it loud. I hit send. Less than 5 seconds later, a single, satisfying word popped up on my screen in reply: copy. I took a deep breath, locked my phone, and slipped it back into my pocket. The trap had officially sprung shut. The countdown had started. Now, all I had to do was walk back out there, serve the wine, and wait for the absolute chaos to unfold. I walked over to the wine cooler, pulled out a vintage, heavy bottle of Cabernet, and grabbed a corkscrew. It was time to go back to work. Before I pushed the swinging kitchen door open, I stopped and opened the bottom drawer of my marble island counter. Tucked safely underneath a stack of old recipe books was a sleek, black leather folder. Inside it was a freshly printed, fully executed copy of Derek's exotic car lease agreement, complete with 3 separate red-stamped notices of default. I grabbed the folder, tucked it neatly under my arm with the bottle of Cabernet in my hand, and walked back into the dining room. Derek was still holding court at the table, leaning in close to Chloe, heavily gesturing with his hands as he passionately described some imaginary, multi-million-dollar tech startup he was supposedly investing in. He paused mid-sentence when I walked in, immediately plastering his arrogant smirk back onto his face. Finally, he groaned, tapping his manicured fingernails against his empty wine glass. I was starting to think you got lost in your own tiny house. I didn't apologize. I didn't even look at him. I walked over to the table, uncorked the bottle with practiced ease, and poured a generous amount into Chloe's glass first, then my parents', and finally Derek's. But instead of bowing my head, stepping back, and retreating to the kitchen like the good little servant he expected me to be, I stayed exactly where I was. I stood firmly right next to Derek's chair. With a deliberate, heavy motion, I placed the black leather folder directly onto the dining table, sliding it right next to his shiny Lamborghini keys. The table went completely quiet. My mother frowned deeply, clearly annoyed that I was lingering and ruining the wealthy aesthetic. "So, Derek," I started, my voice perfectly calm and casually conversational, cutting sharply through the dead silence of the room. "How is the Huracan driving? It's a beautiful piece of machinery, isn't it?" Derek looked up at me, momentarily confused by the sudden, confident shift in my posture and tone. But his ego quickly took over, and he puffed out his chest. "It drives like a absolute dream. But obviously, you wouldn't know the first thing about a V10 engine." "I suppose not," I smiled, a genuine, ice-cold smile. "But what I do know is that usually, when a self-made CEO buys a $250,000 car in straight cash, the dealership doesn't send them a final notice of default for missing 3 consecutive months of lease payments." The entire dining room froze. You could literally hear a pin drop. Derek's face instantly lost all of its color. The smug, confident expression vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. He let out a loud, forced, and incredibly nervous laugh, frantically looking over at Chloe to see if she was buying it. What the hell are you talking about?" Derek stammered, his voice suddenly pitching an octave higher as his fake alpha male facade began cracking in real time. He aggressively pointed a finger at me. "You're delusional. You've been smelling too much cheap grease in that kitchen. Shut your mouth right now and get out of here before you embarrass yourself in front of my girlfriend." But I didn't move a single inch. I just looked down at him. The appetizer was officially over, and it was time to serve the main course. I didn't back down. I didn't even blink. Instead, I reached out and slowly flipped open the black leather folder. I pulled out the top document, a heavy, watermarked, legally binding exotic car lease agreement, and slid it directly across the smooth wood of the dining table, stopping it perfectly between him and Chloe. "I'm not delusional," I said quietly, tapping my index finger on the bottom right corner of the page. "That right there is your signature, Derek. It explicitly outlines your agreement to a monthly payment of nearly $4,000. A payment you haven't made in exactly 92 days. My mother let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her mouth, while my father just stared at the paperwork in total, stunned confusion. Derek's hands actually started trembling. He aggressively lunged forward to snatch the paper away, but Chloe was faster. She picked up the document, her eyes quickly scanning the legal text. "And if you look right next to his signature," I continued, making sure my voice was crystal clear so everyone at the table heard every single word, "you'll see the signature of the CEO and primary asset holder of the leasing firm. Notice anything familiar about the name, Derek?" Derek stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute horror and sickening realization. The gears in his head finally, painfully clicked into place. The struggling freelance cook he had been mocking wasn't just working a catering gig, I was the one holding the keys to his entire fake kingdom. I turned my attention entirely to Chloe. She was looking down at the paperwork, her face completely draining of color as she read the undeniable proof. "Chloe, I'm incredibly sorry to do this during dinner, but you deserve the actual truth," I said, dropping the icy tone and speaking to her with genuine empathy. "The man sitting next to you is not a self-made tech CEO. He doesn't own a company, and he definitely didn't wire anyone $250,000 in cash. He is chronically unemployed. He survives entirely off our parents' home equity, and he used a completely fake shell company to lease that car." I paused for a second, letting the weight of the humiliation settle over my brother. And the only reason he even got approved to drive it off the lot, I added, staring dead into Derek's panicked eyes, is because I secretly paid his $50,000 security deposit out of my own pocket just to see how long he could keep up the lie. You're lying. Derek shrieked, his voice cracking violently. He completely lost his alpha male composure, slamming his fists down on the table so hard the expensive wine glasses rattled. She's insanely jealous. She's a psychotic liar. Chloe, don't listen to her. She printed that garbage off the internet. He was desperately trying to glue his shattered reality back together. But he was about to learn that I didn't just bring paperwork to this fight. I brought the heavy machinery. Chloe completely ignored Derek's pathetic screaming. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked onto the lease agreement in her hands, her fingers gently tracing the raised corporate seal. Then, she slowly turned her gaze to the 3 bright red notice of default stamps clearly printed across the top of the financial statements. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. When Chloe finally looked up, her expression wasn't angry. It was far worse than that. It was pure, unfiltered disgust. It was the look you give a cockroach you just found crawling in your expensive salad. You completely fabricated your entire life, Chloe whispered, her voice dangerously quiet and remarkably steady. Babe, no, listen to me, Derek stammered frantically, reaching out to grab her hand. His face was slick with nervous sweat. It's just a temporary cash flow issue with one of my major offshore accounts. This is just a misunderstanding. I have millions tied up in equity, I swear. Chloe roughly snatched her hand away from his grip like he was diseased. She stood up from the table, her posture perfectly straight, radiating the kind of old money confidence that Derek could only desperately pretend to have. I don't care that you're broke, Derek, she said coldly, looking down at him. I genuinely do not care about the money. What makes me sick to my stomach is that you're a pathetic, pathological liar. You sat here, drinking her wine, eating the food she cooked, and you spent the entire evening publicly humiliating your own sibling to boost your fragile ego. All while she was the one quietly paying for the car you used to pick me up. My mother finally snapped out of her shock. True to form, she immediately leaped to defend her golden child. Now, hold on just a minute, Chloe, my mother interjected defensively, pointing a finger at me. She had no right to ambush him like this. She's always been vindictive and jealous of her brother. This is a private family matter. With all due respect, ma'am, Chloe snapped back, her eyes narrowing sharply at my mother. The fact that you are defending his atrocious, fraudulent behavior explains exactly why he is a 30-year-old man who acts like an entitled child. Derek's jaw dropped. The woman he was trying so desperately to impress with his fake wealth was now openly dissecting his character flaws right in front of his parents. His fake billionaire persona was completely dead and buried. He was cornered, humiliated, and utterly exposed. But just when Derek thought this nightmare couldn't possibly get any worse, a heavy, mechanical hum started vibrating through the dining room walls, followed instantly by the harsh, pulsing flash of bright amber strobe lights violently sweeping across our front lawn. My backup had finally arrived. The harsh, pulsing amber lights from the street swept across the dining room walls, completely washing out the warm lighting of the house. Derek snapped his head toward the front window, his eyes going incredibly wide. He scrambled out of his chair so fast that it tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor, completely ignoring Chloe, my parents, and the massive bombshell I had just dropped. He sprinted out of the dining room and ripped the front door open, with the rest of us stepping out onto the porch right behind him. Parked aggressively in my parents' driveway was a massive, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck. And working with terrifying, practice speed were 2 absolute mountains of men wearing high-visibility vests. They had already positioned the hydraulic lift and were actively securing heavy steel chains and wheel nets around the tires of the neon green Lamborghini Huracan. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Derek screamed, his voice echoing frantically down the quiet suburban street. He sprinted down the driveway, waving his arms like a madman. Get your filthy hands off my car. Drop the truck right now, or I swear to God I'm calling the cops. The lead recovery agent didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from tightening the rear wheel strap. He dealt with screaming, fake rich defaulters every single night for a living, and Derek's temper tantrum didn't even register on his radar. "Go ahead and call them, buddy," the agent said in a deep, gravelly voice, finally standing up and wiping grease on his pants. "Save us the trouble. This vehicle is 90 days in default and is being legally repossessed by the asset management firm." "You have the wrong car, you idiot," Derek shrieked, actually stomping his foot on the concrete like a toddler. "I paid $250,000 in cash for this. It's mine. Unhook it right now." The agent casually walked over to the cab of his truck, pulled out a metal clipboard, and walked right up to my brother. He shoved a piece of paper directly into Derek's chest. "Listen to me very closely," the agent said, dropping his voice to a low, authoritative growl that made Derek instantly step back in fear. "That right there is a direct repossession order. It gives us full legal jurisdiction to secure this asset, and if you try to physically interfere with my truck, I will have you arrested for obstruction." Derek frantically looked down at the clipboard. His eyes scanned the document, and his face went entirely blank. "And if you've got a problem with the paperwork," the agent added, clicking a button on his remote to start the hydraulic winch. The massive Lamborghini began slowly dragging up the steel ramp with a loud, mechanical groan. "You can take it up with the CEO. She signed off on the immediate retrieval order exactly 15 minutes ago." The agent casually pointed a thick, calloused finger directly past Derek. Derek turned around, following the agent's finger, until his eyes locked perfectly onto mine. I was standing comfortably on the top step of the porch, holding my glass of red wine, watching the absolute destruction of his fake empire with a calm, satisfied smile. The heavy, grinding sound of the hydraulic winch pulling the neon green Lamborghini up the steel ramp was deafening, but it was absolutely nothing compared to the dead silence radiating from my brother. Derek stood completely frozen in the middle of the driveway, bathed in the harsh, flashing amber lights of the tow truck. He looked from the car to the massive repo agent and then back up to me standing comfortably on the porch. The sheer gravity of the situation was crushing him in real time. His entire fake reality had just violently collapsed, leaving him with zero power, zero money, and absolutely zero control. Then, the front screen door creaked open. Chloe stepped out onto the porch, her elegant designer coat draped over her shoulders and her purse firmly in her hand. She calmly walked down the concrete steps, completely ignoring my parents, who were still standing by the front door with their mouths hanging wide open in pure shock. Derek snapped out of his panicked trance the second he saw her. He desperately lunged toward her, holding his hands out like a begging dog. "Chloe, please wait. Let me explain. This is just a massive legal mistake. We can call an Uber. We can go back to my penthouse." "You don't have a penthouse, Derek," Chloe interrupted, her voice slicing through the cool night air like a razor blade. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. "You live in your parents' guest room. You don't have a company. You don't have a supercar. You have absolutely nothing." She stopped just a few feet away from him. A sleek, black Uber SUV silently pulled up to the curb right behind the tow truck. She must have ordered it the exact second she finished reading that lease agreement in the dining room. "I can easily forgive someone for struggling financially," Chloe said quietly, looking him up and down with a level of pity that was absolutely devastating to watch. "But I will never, ever forgive a grown man who abuses and humiliates his own sibling just to pretend he's a big shot. You are the most pathetic excuse for a man I have ever met. Do not ever contact me again." She didn't give him a single fraction of a second to respond. She gracefully turned around, opened the door to the waiting SUV, and climbed inside. The vehicle quietly pulled away from the curb, taking his beautiful girlfriend and his entire ticket to the elite lifestyle right along with it. At that exact moment, the tow truck driver hit the final locking mechanism. The heavy steel chains clamped down violently over the Lamborghini's tires with a loud, ringing clang. The screaming and the flashing lights had successfully drawn an audience. Half a dozen of my parents. Neighbors had stepped out onto their front porches, watching the entire spectacle unfold. They were whispering, pointing, and witnessing the undisputed golden child of the neighborhood being publicly stripped of his fake billionaire costume. Derek was left standing completely alone in the middle of the driveway. His girlfriend was gone. His $250,000 prop was strapped to the back of a dirty flatbed. And his fragile, inflated ego had just been completely obliterated in front of the entire neighborhood. As the heavy flatbed truck roared to life and rumbled down the street, taking the neon green Lamborghini and Derek's entire fake identity with it, a deafening silence fell over the driveway. My mother finally found her voice. She spun around, her face flushed with absolute rage, and marched up the porch steps toward me. "How could you do this?" she shrieked, completely ignoring the fact that her son had been lying to everyone. "You humiliated your own brother. You ruined his relationship. You are a spiteful, jealous, horrible sibling, and you are going to call your company and fix this right now." "No," I interrupted. My voice was so dangerously calm and authoritative that it stopped her dead in her tracks. I took one final sip of my red wine, placed the glass gently down on the porch railing, and looked at the three of them. Derek was still standing in the driveway, staring blankly at the empty space where his prop used to be. My father wouldn't even look me in the eye. "I'm not fixing anything ever again," I stated clearly. "For 5 years, I let you treat me like the family disappointment so I could build my empire in absolute peace. But tonight, I watched you actively cheer while Derek treated me like a hired servant in my own family's home. So, the charity is officially over." My mother blinked, her anger faltering into confusion. "What charity? Who do you think has been anonymously paying off the interest on your third mortgage for the last 2 years? I asked, watching the horrifying realization hit my parents like a runaway freight train. "Who do you think quietly bought out Derek's angry investors last year so he wouldn't go to federal prison for fraud? Me. But as of exactly 10 minutes ago, all of those corporate accounts are permanently closed. You wanted your golden boy? You got him. Now you can figure out how to pay his debts." I didn't wait for the shock to wear off, and I certainly wasn't going to stick around for their inevitable begging. I walked down the concrete porch steps, stepping right past my completely paralyzed brother, and reached into my pocket. I pulled out a heavy, matte black key fob and pressed the button. Parked quietly in the shadows across the street, the headlights of a sleek, black, custom-built Aston Martin DBS flashed to life. Not leased. Not financed. Owned outright, paid for in straight cash. Derek's jaw practically hit the pavement as the sheer, undeniable reality of my wealth finally slapped him in the face. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the roaring V12 engine, and pulled away from the curb, leaving the toxic chaos of that house entirely in my rearview mirror. If you are watching this and you are the black sheep or the scapegoat of your family, I need you to listen to me very closely. You do not owe your hard-earned success to the people who mistreated you when you had nothing. Blood does not give anyone the right to use you, mock you, or treat you like a stepping stone for their own fragile ego. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let people believe whatever lies they want to believe about you, while you quietly build a massive, bulletproof empire in the shadows. The absolute best revenge isn't screaming matches at the dinner table. The ultimate revenge is letting them dig their own grave, handing them the shovel, and driving away into a beautiful, peaceful life that they will never, ever be a part of.